All right, welcome everybody. So tonight I have two people with me. One is somebody everybody's heard from before, Bill Sylvie, the Dungeon Delver, and the other is a newcomer. But it's okay. We have a new topic today. We're talking about the JFK assassination and how a whole lot of stuff about it just doesn't seem to add up. And I know there's about a billion different videos out there on it, but we thought we'd kind of take it from the Tim and Bill side. Um, because there's been a lot of new releases of paperwork lately. There's been a lot of books written over the years. There's been a lot of discussions. There's images, pictures. There's a museum here in Dallas. There's even a spot downtown in Dallas where I've been where you can like run out the street. They have little X's where the bullets were fired at. You can actually get your picture taken right on the X where the bullet hit. Not advisable. It's a busy part of town. But you can do it. And one of the reasons I've kind of gotten into this over the years is I have personally met a number of people who were involved in the investigation, including one of the scientists who helped do audio reconstruction across Dealey Plaza back for the Warren Commission days. And he went on to win the Nobel Prize for his work in atomic clocks. So he's a very precision measurement guy. And even he would only say, "Yeah, I give it." He wouldn't he wouldn't come close to saying 100%. He would come close to saying, "Yeah, there's a large chance," but he would never assign a percentage to it. Which I'm like, dude, come on, you're killing me here. I've talked to doctors who worked at the hospital. There's only one or two left alive that actually worked there, but I've talked to other doctors that have worked at that hospital that have spoken to people that were actually on duty that day. And I've read half a dozen books on the subject, been to the museum and everything else. And the one conclusion I've come to after watching all the film and looking out that window is the people who say the bullets couldn't have been fired from that window are wrong because it's not that hard of a shot to make from there. However, when you watch the Zapruder film, man, it sure looks like there's bullets coming from more than one angle. And one of the things that always drove me nuts, and then I'll let people dive in here, is there was an early report from some of the people in the Parkland ER that showed a gaping wound in the back of the president's head. And there is no way that happens from that book depository, if you're being honest about it. And then later on, they recanted their story and went, no, we didn't really mean that. We meant this other thing. The trouble is, doctors don't normally get that kind of stuff wrong and they have to go back and recant their story. So um, that one has always driven me nuts over the years, why we got two different stories coming out of them. And if you guys were looking at my computer screen, you can see one of the X's on the streets in Dallas. They're sort of out there. You get to run out and play dodge the traffic cone or dodge the incoming traffic, which Dallas drivers will have no sympathy for you. They'll run you down. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to the guests now and let you guys dive into what drew you to this, and then we'll dive into just what doesn't hold water. So Tim, I'll let you go first.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me on, Tim. I appreciate it. Yeah, my name is Tim Gardner. I started studying the case back in 1997. I was always fascinated with obviously the JFK movie that Oliver Stone brought out. But I think for me, just in general, I was always never really a conspiracy theorist per se. The movie was really, really super entertaining, but as you talk to people over the years, my grandfather, for one, he always said, no, that thing never really added up. And it started getting me on a trail to start talking to people. So I've talked to Robert Groden. I've talked to all sorts of different assassination research experts. And it comes to a conclusion that, in my opinion, that it was a conspiracy. But there's a lot more to it. It's not as difficult as we think it is, but at the end of the day, it's right in front of our face. It's just piecing it all together. And a lot of people like to work different angles, like the mob and all certain things. But really, the most obvious thing, if you caught the Joannese files being released the other day, is that it has CIA written all over him. And in my opinion, this was a standard CIA operation, and then everything else trickled down from there.
Okay. Bill, I'll throw it to you.
Okay. First of all, Tim, thank you very much for having me on. And other Tim, I am Tim numbered here. I'm Timmed up on. So as the lone Bill, I feel on my back foot. But I want to talk a little bit about history for a minute, if we can. And I promise you, I'm going somewhere with this. And Tim, you mentioned the CIA a little bit, and there's a historical perspective I want to take a moment here, and I think when we talk about the CIA and other intelligence organizations and that sort of thing, we have to look holistically at the mystery that surrounds this. Before I get into that, though, I do want to say I think something fishy went on. Nothing I'm about to say is meant to construe the idea that I believe 100% that it was just Lee Harvey Oswald and only Oswald, and anybody else who says otherwise is crazy. Just so you guys understand that, I'm not approaching this from a standpoint of I think you're both wrong or I think you're both, delving into things. The term conspiracy theory didn't exist until the CIA coined it as a mind kill, psychological uh, bit of wordplay to immediately destroy the idea that that there might be a perspective here that is worth looking at beyond the official story. It came up in congressional hearings. Well, that's just a conspiracy theory. You can pinpoint it exactly when the phrase conspiracy theory entered the human lexicon, and it came from the mouths of the CIA to shut down any idea that any story other than the official was wrong. I don't like the term conspiracy theory unless I'm being extremely derisive. For example, I absolutely 110% believe that the United States put men on the moon in 1969. That happened. That's an immutable fact, and people who engage in stories otherwise are engaging in conspiracy theories. But I'm getting a little far afield. Let's talk a little bit about history. Uh, at this time in history, uh, the United States and the Soviet Union were squaring off against each other in the global arena as the two big powers. If you were around at the time, I was not. Tim, I don't think you were.
No.
Tim Imholt, I don't think you were either. Uh, but one thing that was sold to us by the government um, was the idea that there was a missile gap, that the Soviets had missile and bomber fleets that were above anything we had. And even if they were just on par, they had so many more of them. They could annihilate us in a heartbeat. Our poor boys would barely be off the runways, and our birds would barely be out of the silos before the red hordes would be parachuting into Times Square while mushroom clouds rose up in the background. We know now that was a lie. The Russians had very few ICBMs. They were liquid fueled. They took minutes, like tens of minutes, to even get vertical and then start fueling them to launch them. Um, so we had them on their back foot in every measurable quantity in terms of nuclear power: bombers, subs, uh, strategic, and theater nuclear weapons. Um, that was one of the things that kicked off the Cuban Missile Crisis. Was we had Jupiter missiles sitting in Turkey that could hit Moscow faster than the missiles that the Soviets wanted to put in Cuba could hit Savannah or New York or Washington, or Orlando or Miami for that matter. Uh, the the missile gap, the bomber gap, the atomic gap was a lie, and it was promulgated by the military industrial intelligence complex in the United States, including the CIA. Hang on to that thought for just a second. Let's shift over to something else that is relevant to this. The U.S. government spent decades. J. Edgar Hoover spent decades telling the people, telling Congress, telling the federal government, there is no organized crime in the United States. Yeah, there's street gangs in Chicago. There's street gangs in New York. There's no large organized.
Whitey Bulger might have an argument against that.
Yeah, exactly. There's no large organized crime in the United States. That's balderdash. We're arresting bank robbers and pimps and drug dealers and guys running crooked Keno wheels. You don't worry about it. And what happened in early 1963? A mobster, and I forget his name. Let me scroll back through my notes. But he testified before Congress and said, "Guess what? We're everywhere. We are everywhere." The Kefauver hearings. I know I messed that up. It raised public awareness of organized crime. They had who was it? Basically, it was exposed. It was out, and it was exposed, and people were now acutely aware of it. The mob had people going before Congress. The mob had people turning coat on them and going before Congress. The mob was hemorrhaging intelligence. So we have two similar situations in two government organizations, government law enforcement, we'll just call it the FBI, and the military intelligence industrial complex, we'll just call them the CIA. Both had casus belli to move without let or hindrance if only there were a catalyzing event that they could create. If the CIA had assassinated Kennedy, this is my opinion. You guys can knock holes in it. I'm willing to listen. If the CIA had assassinated Kennedy, Johnson could have gone on TV the next day and said, "Those red bastards killed our president. I have authorized that a state of war will now exist between the U.S. and the USSR." Johnson knew, the JCS knew, SAC NORAD knew, the Navy knew, and the Army knew there was no fucking missile gap. There was no nuclear weapons gap. There was no technology gap. Yes, we would have taken 1 million, 5 million casualties, maybe. We would have bombed the Soviets out of existence. We would have literally extirpated the Soviet Union from the face of the planet. That is the wettest dream of the military industrial complex, is to literally eradicate them forever. So if they assassinated Kennedy, why not take that opportunity? Why not say, it was the Reds, go get them, boys. 36 hours later, they're gone. And America would have cheered it on. We would have had Coca-Cola ads commemorating the event. We would have had McDonald's, 15 cents nuke burgers to kill the Reds. It would have been like the freaking Fallout games. FBI, same thing. What could we do to suspend habeas corpus, to suspend people's Fourth Amendment rights? What could we do? Well, if we pin Kennedy's assassination on the mob, we can arrest everybody from shoplifters to mob bosses, and people will willingly let us suspend legal rights to do it. We'll say, those greasy mobsters killed our president. Give us just a little while to clean them up. Just give up just a little bit of liberty, and we will make sure this never happens again. They would have been building skyscrapers on Alcatraz Island to house the numbers of people that they would have arrested. So you have the two biggest groups that could have benefited from putting this lunatic in the book depository building and letting him do what he wanted to do. And if it was either one, why didn't they initiate the next logical step that would follow? That's my question. Now, I firmly believe there is some chicanery that went on, but I don't think it was on the face of it one of those two groups.
Tim, I'll let you take this if you'd like, because I'm sure you have an opinion here somewhere.
Yeah. No, and Bill, by the way, that was some great insight, and I really respect your take. So I come from a different perspective on this.
Okay.
My perspective is that Jack Kennedy, while he was a poster boy for, being a young, brash, handsome president at the time, he had vital disagreements with the CIA, like vital disagreements with the CIA, and there's a reason why he fired Alan Dulles and some other members. And forgive me, the name's slipping my mind right now, but
yeah, he wanted to disassemble them, right? He wanted to like break them
right,
up.
yeah, he wanted his famous quote is basically he wanted to splinter it into 1,000 pieces. But basically, what he was doing was his outlook on things is I'm the president, I'm the most powerful man in literally the free world, and he wanted to start making a peace treaty with Khrushchev, and that was in terms of doing things like sharing like their secrets of space, like what their goals were on space and different things of that magnitude. And then if you on the flip side, if you look at it, the CIA with the firing of Dulles and what had happened, they looked at that as treason. And with treason, their rule is that it's death. And I always stand by this because I have interviewed former CIA agents before, talked to CIA agents before, and they looked at him as a complete traitor. Now, when we talk about Oswald specifically, Oswald was monitored all the way from 1955. Now, I don't know about you, if he was some sort of nut, some crazy lone nut that planned this shooting, why were they monitoring him in 1955? And I mean, when he was only 17 years old. These are questions that are completely valid. And as you go into, there's a memo in 1960 by J. Edgar Hoover talking about there is an imposter for Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, they were doing strict intel on this guy for a long, long time. Now, this is just my opinion. When 1963 hit, there were a lot of different coincidences that started happening in Dallas. Like, for example, the meeting with the Paynes. I don't know how familiar you are with Ruth and Michael Payne, but they allegedly were CIA assets. That's allegedly. That's never been 100% proven because Ruth has never talked and Michael never talked. But it is proven that they had family members in the CIA. And without sounding like a complete conspiracy theorist on this regard, there was a reason why they were able to coordinate Oswald to get a job at the book depository. And he had gotten a job at the book depository, I believe it was in September of 63. And there were a lot of shady dealings with Oswald completely in 1963. Now, my opinion basically on this whole thing is that I believe that the CIA started coordinating this after the fall of the Bay of Pigs, where Kennedy failed to send out any sort of air control to protect those ground troops that were storming Cuba. He essentially washed his hands of it. He said, you guys are on your own, and there you go. And that really pissed off the CIA. The CIA is really super powerful. And I get where you're coming from about like what Johnson would do, but at the end of the day, I don't believe Johnson would have enough power himself. If Kennedy didn't have enough power to override these guys, what makes you think that Johnson would have? I mean,
I'm not sure Johnson was enough in the loop to really.
Well, and I agree with you, Tim. Thank you for saying that. But that is my thesis. Why not take that next logical step? Why not walk into the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, we have evidence. This guy, we have been monitoring this guy since 1955 when he started showing communist leanings. This was a Soviet agent, Mr. President. they have committed an act of war. We have to respond. We have to take the
Well,
next logical step. Why not do that? It would have been the jewel in the crown for them to strike down the USSR, and they had that opportunity. Why not do it?
Well, in my opinion, it wasn't a big enough factor like Vietnam was. Vietnam was actually the biggest factor because if you look at the assassination of President Diem, he died, I believe, a month right before John Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
That was their opportunity for Bell Helicopter to make a bunch of money and to make the military industrial complex a ton of money. And I don't want to sound like Fletcher Prouty because I mean, please, just that guy was nuts. I don't want to sound like that guy at all. But what I'm saying was he had enough there in that movie JFK. He had enough there also in his book to kind of outline what the military industrial complex and the CIA where they were headed with this whole thing. And so I think that he had something there. But as we're talking about, like, getting the profile of Oswald in New Zealand, like literally hours after Kennedy got shot, I think that's a bunch of bullshit.
well, the other thing that gets me about this, right, is that if you look into detail at the Secret Service procedures that day and some of the weird things that happened immediately following the assassination, you've got the Parkland doctors not doing an autopsy, and they took it back to DC. A guy who'd never done an autopsy in his life is suddenly doing one on the president, right? Which
Mhm.
makes no sense to me. You would have gotten the finest guy you could have found anywhere on planet Earth to run that autopsy, not some guy who'd never run one before. The change of heart on where some of the entry and exit wounds are, the magic bullet thing never made sense to me. So there's something weird there.
I want to talk about that, but
But
go ahead, Tim.
let me get to my point here. Johnson, I don't think was as powerful as people gave him credit for. I think he was way out of the loop on a whole lot of stuff. I'm not sure he and Kennedy really got along all that well.
They
Um,
didn't. They didn't at
yeah,
all. They hated each other.
but
Especially he hated RFK. But sorry.
but if you look at it right after this event, the CIA grew massively in their size. Right, they got significantly bigger. And if you look at who was at CIA at the time, but kind of denying that they were, we have a former a senator who nobody'd really heard of at the time, who went on to become vice president and then president, named Bush, who was over at the agency at the time, or at least involved with him from his seat in the Senate. And eventually wound up running the place, and he wound up in charge over there. And he had never really worked there ever. He'd been in Senate, then all of a sudden he's running an agency, and now all of a sudden he's VP. Yeah, I'm not saying he was directly involved, but man, he came out of nowhere to kind of get some of these really interesting jobs in that agency. So, that whole thing grew quickly after the assassination. So, Bill, I hear what you're saying about why didn't they go after Russia, but they did go after a whole lot of growth and a whole lot of how do we get to be bigger and more influential. And they succeeded, because from between 1966 and today, well, I don't want to say today because they're not as effective as they once were, but from the 60s until 9/11, when they kind of failed us, I think they were continuing to grow in budget, which is the only thing in DC that really matters to anybody, is getting your budget to be larger. And then after 9/11, man, their budget just ballooned. At least the intelligence agencies did. But I think people lost faith in the CIA after that because they just flat out missed it. But man, from the assassination of Kennedy up until about the fall of the Berlin Wall, they got any budget request they wanted. I mean, it just was bigger and bigger and bigger the whole time. So, okay, we didn't go to war, but they certainly used it to get bigger, man.
Well, I think that's a valid point of view, Tim. And what one might counter argue with me, well, would that be, killing the goose to get a couple more golden eggs? You destroy the Soviet Union and you're finished with an enemy. You string them along and keep them alive and keep spying on them, and you keep getting bigger and bigger budgets. And I think
Yeah.
that's a valid counter argument to it. One thing I do really, because this bugs me a lot, and again, I'm not. I'm not like a government disinfo agent. Okay, I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh, you guys are wrong. It was just one crazy guy." Um, Tim knows me well enough to know that ain't me. But the only man, this puts my teeth on edge, and that is the magic bullet is only a magic bullet if you don't realize that Connolly, Governor Connolly, was not sitting at the same height and directly in front of JFK. The floorboard of the presidential limo has two rumble seats that fold up. Connolly was supposed to be sitting on JFK's right. He apparently made some off-color comment or something, disparaged the president, and he still got his limousine ride, but he ended up sitting on the floorboard in what was essentially a child's seat, that right behind the front seat. And he was looking to the right at the crowd. The magic bullet thing about Connolly, it's only a magic bullet if you think that he was sitting at a 90-90 angle in front of the president. Same height, same alignment. Like if you were standing directly behind the limo looking at them, you'd see them directly in line and you'd be looking across the tops of both of their heads. He wasn't. He was lower in the limousine and he was further towards the middle because of how those fold-up seats work. So the magic bullet makes sense once you realize Connolly was lower and closer to the center. Then the track of the bullet is perfect because that's where he was sitting. So that's all I wanted to say about the actual magic bullet. And as far as the shot, as far as the ballistics, one of the things, and I have been fascinated with the Kennedy administration, with the Kennedy assassination theories since I was 6. I was watching PBS. I was waiting for something good to come on TV because we had like 3.5 television stations we could get without cable when I was a kid back in the 1970s. And one of those was PBS. And this thing came on and I was just watching it. And even little 6 or 7-year-old me, I was pulled into it. And I was asking my dad questions. What are they talking about? When did this happen? And so on and et cetera. And, he did his best to explain it that I'd understand. And back then in the 70s, one of the popular theories was, because I heard this from relatives and friends of the family and that sort of thing. Well, that shot was impossible. Nobody could pull that shot was extremely possible. People do it all the time.
I've been in that museum and even with the not so great rifle he was using, the shot would not have been that difficult. I know 20 deer hunters that could have made that shot. So that was
not an impossible shot. That was not some miracle shot. There was no team of CIA snipers on the grassy knoll or hiding in a sewer grate.
Well, now the grassy knoll, I'll hang on a minute. So Tim, you don't know about this. I live in Dallas. Bill lives in Florida. So, if you don't own rifles when you show up in either state, they just ask somebody, they'll give you one.
Yeah, exactly. They're issued to you.
They're just kind of like standard practice. So you got a driver's license. Here, take your rifle. The grassy knoll. So the thing about the grassy knoll that sticks out in my head is there are 2 versions of medical reports that came out about the head injury to the president. Okay. And one of the doctors said that when they put their hand behind Kennedy's head, kind of his brain fell out from the back. Okay. That sounds like an exit wound. And there was a hand sketched image that, doctors in the 60s would have like sketched out. Here's what I see an injury, right? Of a gaping wound in the back of his head. You don't get that from the angle that thing was at from the book depository. You get an entry wound. You don't get an exit wound from that angle. That sounds like an exit wound, right? I mean, it just does. You get a big hole. That's not an entry wound. That's an exit wound, especially with the type of rifle he was using. It wasn't, he wasn't launching hand grenades. He was launching smaller rounds. But that to me says something from a different direction, whether it was grassy knoll or somewhere else. I've actually seen people say, "Oh, there were as many as 3 shooters." I don't know if I buy off on that, but the grassy knoll from that angle, that would have been an incredibly easy shot. And if there is a conspiracy going on to say, "Hey, let's take this guy out," you don't depend on one shooter with that much security around. You'd want a backup plan. That would have been a fantastic place to put one. Speaking to somebody who has been in the Army and said, where do I want to take my shot from? That would have been a great spot. The book depository would have been fine. But the other thing that always gets me when these subjects come up is why was there a change in between the medical reports as time went on? Why was there Secret Service involvement of people going, are you sure that's what happened? Can we be sure? Doctors, and the other, well, okay, let me back up a second because I kind of got, my brain and mouth got out of sync with each other. But one of the things I found from a doctor who, I used to live very close to Parkland and one time wound up taking my son to the ER because he broke his arm, and wound up talking to his doctor and wound up having drinks with him, not in the ER, later on. But he worked at Parkland. He said when he started working there, one of the people he worked with was actually in the ER the day of Kennedy, right? So the day Kennedy happened. They said there were a number of things that happened. One was there was a lot of pressure applied to doctors to kind of tell the story a certain way. And that seems weird if it was just one guy. Why apply pressure to it? Okay. Maybe tell the doctors, hey, we'll handle press, but whatever. Right. The other one was, there's a lot of people going, oh, why did it take them so long to declare, Kennedy had passed? Because no doctor in his right mind wanted to be the one to declare the president dead. Was why that happened. You see a bunch of ER doctors going, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to be the guy that goes out and tells everybody that. But if you look at the reports from the ER, the amount of brain matter that was on his wife's dress, the amount of carnage that was in that limo, I don't think you get it from just one angle. I don't think you cause enough damage to the president's head by getting it from just that one direction. I think you have to hit it from multiple angles. So I am a big, depending on the day you catch me, I'm 60-40, and you can talk me into either direction of whether it was just from the book depository or if it was from two directions. And the more and more I watch some of the cleaned up versions of the Zapruder film, the more I'm like, it really looks like there was another shot coming from another direction. Because if you look at it, there's one part where basically the whole side of the president's head kind of gets, blood kind of flies out. And it's not like, it doesn't look like it's coming from the book depository angle. It looks like it's coming from some other angle. So that to me, it was like, there's something here that just does not hold water. So Tim, I'll throw it to you. I've talked to it.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Have you guys watched a documentary What the Parkland Doctor Saw?
Yes.
I have not.
Okay.
No.
So it's Bill, I recommend it. It's really, really fascinating. And especially, with somebody that's just really on the fence about the whole assassination, I think it's just a fascinating watch. But Tim, you brought up a real brilliant point about the gaping hole in the back of the head. Now, when I was about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, excuse me, I talked to Dr. Robert McLennan down in Texas, and I got a chance to talk. One of the nicest guys I've ever met, but all the interviews that I saw prior to that and everything was verbatim to what he told me. And I was just like, I was really puzzled. I'm not even puzzled by that, because if there was 14 doctors that witnessed the same thing, which there, 14 or more, you would have to look at it and go, well, I mean, they're onto something here. They're doctors. What would be their motive to specifically lie about this? You know what I mean? They were
especially in the minutes following the assassination, right? I mean,
right.
Getting 14 people on the same page. Come on. That's
well, yeah. and Dr. Malcolm Perry is the one that actually sketched out the original sketch, and he had that gaping hole in the back of the head. And what's interesting is we could talk about the autopsy, this and that, but they say that they flew him over to Bethesda, they sewed his head up, and then they did another autopsy with the back of his head sewn up or whatever. I don't really like to get into that because, again, that's really, you like to argue all the time. I mean, you talk about Jack Ruby and all these other factors and stuff, which I would like to talk about Ruby here in just a bit, but that whole autopsy, to me, I believe what the Parkland doctor said. I mean, like, again, these guys had no motive at all to lie. These guys were, men of integrity. They made good money, and there was just no specific reason for them. And they loved the president. And so, I mean, for me, I believe what they were saying. But back when you guys talk about the grassy knoll headshot, it's interesting because you brought up the footage of the Zapruder film, and if you watch that footage again and just real time, it is evident to me, and I'm not some expert of marksmanship, but it looks like a shot from where that area is. And to make that much damage to the head, to me, it would be very impossible. Now, one other point I want to bring up too, multiple witnesses, we're talking probably hundreds of witnesses, heard the shot pattern. And the shot pattern started out with boom and then boom, boom. And there is no Carcano that can be that rapid at the end there, because you have to cock the gun itself.
Yeah, it went a little bit fast. I mean, there was actually a test, and I will give him this. There was a guy who went and got the Carcano and actually could reproduce that rapid nature of doing it. But it was really close, and it was under very controlled condition. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't like, oh my God, I'm shooting at the president. And so the conditions were much different. You can technically do it, but it was like really close in. And they got one of the best marksmen in the world to pull that shot, to pull off the rapid nature of it. So it kind of got to the point where I'm like, okay, you pull in the best guy on the planet to do this, and he's not under stress. He's not, oh my God, am I going to be shot back? Right. But the other thing that got me was, in fact, I've got the Zapruder film on my on the screen right now. I'm sharing it. You guys can't see it because you're on your phones, but it really does look like there's something going on. And then Jacqueline kind of climbs onto the back of the limo and then back in like she's trying to grab something. And what was she trying to grab? It looked like a piece of the president's head. I mean, she was probably under so much. Yeah, there's that frame where it just looks like there's something coming out of a weird angle that makes no sense coming from the book depository. And how did she get covered with that much brain matter if she was that close? And there was a book I was reading recently. I forget which one it was. I'd have to go over my bookshelf and find it, but that bone matter was found on the left-hand side of the road, and that doesn't work with those angles. Right. So how was skull bone matter found on the left-hand side of the road if all the shots were coming from the book depository? So something doesn't hold water in that story.
And real quick, and if I may add something, that was a great point you just made, Tim. Mm-hmm. It was found on the left side of the road, and I believe that's where James Teague was standing. Yeah. In that particular area where he got hit with the bone fragment in the face.
That's what I'm talking about. There was like a motorcycle cop or something that got hit on like the opposite side of the road.
The only thing I'd like to point out about bullet directions and this, that, and the other, in the Allied, and I put that in air quotes, intervention in Afghanistan, the longest to date, I think, longest range sniper shot was done by a Canadian Special Forces trooper on a Al-Qaeda operative anyway. They went down and they found the body that he had shot, and he had shot him from the front. I want to be 100% clear about that. He shot him from the front. I don't know what caliber he was using, but he's posing with the body, and the front of the individual's head is open like a pair of barn doors, and the inside of his head is empty. His brain is no longer there. Don't go look for the picture. It's not good for your soul.
Now, having tested ballistics for the Army for a long time, there is a world of difference in modern munition versus today. So the hypersonic stuff, the massively faster moving rounds we have today versus what they had then, will do that kind of stuff because it creates a massive vacuum behind it. And what happens is everything gets pulled into that vacuum. The Carcano is not that rifle. It just isn't. It's not remotely fast enough to pull that kind of thing off, and the bullet's not big enough to create that kind of a wake behind it. But I know what you're talking about, Bill. That kind of stuff happens all the time with some of the Barrett 50 cals and some of the bigger stuff. But the Carcano is not big enough to pull that off.
That's fine. I just
looked it up. The shots were at 265 feet from the book depository, and it was even closer to the grassy knoll. So this was not a challenging shot, even with open sights. So
yeah,
I could have made this with a 22 when I was 15. But.
Sure.
So Tim, you wanted to bring up something else about Lee Harvey Oswald and the guy who killed him.
Yeah, so Jack Ruby, it's interesting because Jack Ruby, there are records with him specifically working with the FBI before,
Mhm.
and this goes back to Chicago. Ruby had a he was in with the Dallas Police Department, who went to the Carousel Club, and they frequented there and visited there all the time. Obviously, if they let him in downstairs to get access and to also be a reporter to talk to Oswald, that's interesting in itself, right? So, I mean, you just have a friend that comes by posing as a reporter, and then you have him come downstairs, and then he opens fire and kills the assassin. Now, my question is always been, but I have the answer to it is, why would they do that? And I believe that he had access down there, and I believe that somebody higher up gave him the advance to go ahead and do that. Now, because I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was such a complicated individual, and again, since they were tracking him from 55 on, he was, from what I've gathered, he was an asset for the CIA. You guys saw the Joe Anides file just open up, and you read the dialogue there with Joe Anides and his alias having contact with Oswald prior to the assassination in 1963. Now, I want to get off base real quick, and I'll pull it right in. But I always tell people, if you want to solve the assassination, if you really do believe that there's a conspiracy, you have to answer what happened directly after the assassination, up into the point where J.D. Tippit got killed, and then why did he get killed, and why was it a random killing? For me specifically, if you look at the timing, when allegedly when Oswald took off from the book depository, wasn't able to get on the bus because it was of the traffic, then took a cab, went to his boarding house, threw his jacket on, and then he would have had to run over to where JD Tippit was, shoot JD Tippit, come all the way back to the movie theater, and sneak right in, have the police called to him, supposedly meet his handler, and there is direct correlation that he had bought popcorn. Now, I don't know about you. If I kill the president of the United States, I'm not going to be doing all that like directly afterwards. This is the president of the United States. So that doesn't add up to me whatsoever. Now,
I'd be
back
on
to
my way
Jack
to Mexico.
Ruby.
Be on my way to Mexico somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so that timing doesn't add up to me. But when it comes to Jack Ruby specifically, there was a reason that they wanted to shut up Lee Harvey Oswald, and I believe it did have to deal with intelligence factors.
Yeah, I mean, he was in and out of. I mean, so much stuff about him is. What's funny to me is, and the other part of this whole thing that just doesn't smell right is, if we're supposed to believe he was just some random guy who was mad at the president, and we know a crap ton about this guy for that to be true, right? I mean, there's documents going back forever on him, from us, from the Russians, from every which angle, and they knew it lightning fast, right? So it was like somebody somewhere knew this guy was up to something, because if you look at secret, and Tim, I'd love to hear your take on this. The Secret Service, even back then, would have said, closed windows everywhere. There would have been people on the lookout for hours long before the president drove through that area. The moment the book depository window opened up, somebody would have been like, "Hey, wait a minute, what the heck?" Right? And none of that took place. They actually had a very minimal detail going through a very interesting part of Dallas in front of a large crowd. So they relaxed their security on the day when this happens. Come on, all this just gets really lucky. Oswald, if he was acting alone with no help from anyone anywhere ever, was either the luckiest guy on the face of planet Earth, or there was more to it. Because why would the Secret Service suddenly get lazy? Right? I mean, that makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point. I mean, they did back off, and I don't know if you guys know this, but they were out drinking the night before. They were at
That
some
doesn't surprise
clubs,
me.
and they stayed out, and these guys were nursing hangovers the next day, and which is just absolutely ridiculous. If you have a sitting president in a convertible that's going through Dallas with, like you just mentioned, Tim, no sharpshooters, no security, like within all these buildings, and then really the salt on the wound for me, guys. I don't know about you, but there are no agents sitting on either side of Jackie or the president. I mean, you don't have any agents sitting there on the platforms that they have for that Lincoln convertible. And then the other thing is the distance that's back from the limo, that's from their limo to the back car where the agents are sitting in, there was some distance on that. And then the other thing too, which really boggles my mind, and I'd love to hear your guys' take on this, is why in the world did Kellerman like slow down the vehicle? Why did he stop the vehicle essentially when this stuff was happening? It just boggles my mind. I'm sorry, I'm a little passionate about it, but good Lord.
He did kind of slow down the vehicle when it was, after the first shot was fired. You can see it in the Zapruder film. It's like it didn't get faster. And, it's like and bring it forward to today, right? When you've got, there was the attempt on now President Trump, then candidate Trump. I guess he was a former president too at the time. Yeah, that shooter was down microseconds after the first shot was taken, right? Arguably should have been down before the first shot was taken, but still. And here, you get 3 shots and then a manhunt. I mean, on a normal day, Secret Service would have had this guy down, 1 shot. Okay, Jack's in pain. He's still alive, but now, Oswald is no more. So something, and, anyway, I'll be quiet. Bill, you want to take it?
Well, one of the things, and I'm asking, not stating as fact. So trust me, I'm not being dogmatic about any of what I'm saying. But regarding the Zapruder film, that was a hand cranked camera running at either 14.5 or 18.5 frames a second. Generally, when it's presented nowadays, it's running at 24.5. It would have been running at 29.7 when I first saw it on TV, NTSC values. And nowadays, when it's shown, it's generally shown at 24 frames a second. And I think it's subject to potentially, and note I put I think it's a subject to misinterpretation, perhaps as well, anything else shot on a home camera. It's like so.
Well, by comparison to today's cameras, it was archaic, right? I mean, we're not talking modern technology.
Sure, no, I understand, but what I'm saying is there's a potentiality for misinterpretation of the frame rate if you're watching that. I am sure when they confiscated Zapruder's film, or when he gave it over, I don't know, that they weren't immediately thinking, this isn't just like it is in the cinema. Should we speed up the frame rate or anything like that? Or maybe they were. I don't know.
So when I went down to Dallas, and I've been down to the site a couple times, those you can see on the street how far apart those shots are, right? And the first one and the second one are a pretty fair distance, but the second and third are right on top of each other. So that vehicle was not moving quick when those second and third shots were taken. By any stretch of the imagination. And you're right in that it was an old camera, and maybe he wobbled a little bit, made it look a little slower than it was. Any number of things could have happened. But the other thing that gets me about all this is there was almost, I mean, you got a lot of trained police, you got a lot of trained first responders around. And if you watch the Zapruder film, there's almost no reaction until the third shot. I mean, you get a little bit of reaction because people are kind of trying to help Jackie because she tried to climb onto the trunk, but there's almost no reaction until sort of that third shot, and then everybody goes, "Okay, now it's time to react." Right now, so
well, and to that I would say this, Tim, and I have read studies and I have seen it documented. and this goes back as far back as the First World War, and I'm sure it goes back even further. I'm sorry, the Second World War, and they studied this in Korea and Vietnam, and ever since then, um, is even trained soldiers, men who are, I mean, picoseconds can make a difference between life and death. Mm-hmm. When they come under fire, there is a large percentage of them, they freeze, even if it's just for a second to assess where they are, where their weapon is, where their comrades are, where the enemy might be. There is a freeze that happens, and it happens in a large percentage of even trained people. Now, police officers in Dallas,
that's true, but I still go back to the whole thing of bone fragments found on the left and some of the weird ways that it shows the president's head falling apart, and then back to the Parkland doctors with the big gaping hole in the back instead of the front. That many doctors in a room are not going to make the same mistake, right? They're just not.
Sure, and I'm just talking about what happened in the moment, not the not the fragments.
Can I cut in real?
Absolutely.
Can I say something real quick?
No, please.
Okay, so Bill, I really respect your take on there, and I value it. So thank you so much. I think what you have to also factor in is the eyewitness accounts. Now, all three of us know that eyewitness accounts are about as good as throwing crap up on the wall and seeing if it sticks, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But now, with all the people that said that the driver was either downshifting or he was putting he was braking at that particular time. Now, so my take on this is this: when if I'm driving somebody and I see somebody get shot behind me and that's in the same car as me, I'm going to panic and probably brake. Now, that's what I believe. That's what Kellerman did. I believe he just was like, "Oh my God, what what's going on here?" And so that's my thought on that. But I respect the fact that you're talking about the speed of the film, but there is no argument in my mind that they did slow down that vehicle. And to me, that seems particularly suspicious because, if there was, let's say, a coup, right? My personal opinion is that there was, but I'm coming in this just in general.
Okay.
They would slow it down just enough to get that clear shot to blow his head off in the way that it happened.
Sure. I mean, that's if we take that as true, then all the a priori evidence fits that point of view perfectly. Again, I'm just asking questions. I'm just trying to look at this. There's a statement, Tim, this as well as I do. Follow the money, right?
Yeah.
Well, in this case, we can be money equals power, right?
Well, I used to
more or less approximates to power.
When I worked in defense, there was this 06 over at the Pentagon that told me the secret to having a good career in the defense and aerospace industry is find the money, hide the money, find more money. So
sure,
it's like, all right, that's just wrong in so many ways. Although it's true, it's just very, very, very wrong. Yeah, and for an 06 to actually admit that, I was like, okay, we have problems.
Yeah, and I think that's that kind of goes back to my my original thesis of who benefits from this. When you talk about this being a coup, is who benefits from it? The FBI or the CIA absolutely do. It's not a mob hit, because if the mob did it, then again, the FBI was already all over them. This would have been the end of them, and they had proven, or rather, it was proven that they leak like a sieve. People talk about omerta, the code of silence, yada yada.
Yeah, right.
People turn on the mob like it's like, oh, you're going to give me a bucket of KFC and $5,000? Okay, here's what I know.
Yeah, I'll believe they took out Oswald's assassin, but I don't think that they were involved in the presidential hit at all.
Yeah, I
But
can absolutely
the
believe
other
the
thing
mob
that
got pissed off enough
yeah,
to kill Oswald.
well, the other thing that gets me about this, and it has for years, is if there was no agency or no government involvement in this at all, why is it being kept classified since the 1960s? Right?
That is a huge problem for me too. And so something else I had wanted to mention this at the beginning, and for our viewers slash listeners, and for you guys, I absolutely think our government, not even today, but back then,
Mhm.
was capable of some absolute capital E comic book level evils. I mean, the Tuskegee experiment, MK Ultra, these are all absolutely documented times when they looked at the people of the United States and said, we're just going to do evil shit to you guys, just constantly for no readily apparent reason and no benefit. We're sadistic
So,
SOBs.
so help me out. MK Ultra was them giving LSD essentially to prisoners, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, MK Ultra was so many psychological
Yeah, it
operations
was it was
conducted
them
on
trying
people.
to like,
It
yeah,
wasn't just LSD
it
given
was
to
all kinds of stuff.
students. It was
Yeah, there was a okay. So Bill, you know this, and I'm sure Tim, you know this as well. But you guys know of Jolyon West, right? Dr. Jolyon West,
Mhm.
yeah.
The so he kind of spearheaded the whole thing, and in this conspiracy field, they like to say that he's the one that injected Ruby with cancer. I don't know about that.
No, I
But
don't think so either.
yeah, and they also talked about, but I do believe in some cases that there was some LSD placement because there were, witnesses seeing Ruby in jail, like hitting his head in the back, like basically causing damage to his skull when he was in prison. He was seeing things, and you can call him a schizophrenic or whatnot, but he didn't have that on his record. So Jolyon West did visit Ruby several times while he was in prison. But anyways, the MK Ultra thing is just like Bill was saying. It's just so out there. It's
Mhm.
so bizarre.
But
What they would do to patients was just crazy.
and here's
So we also live in a much different world, right? Because like in World War II, I can go through a laundry list of stuff that we and other countries experiment with that we should never say out loud ever
yeah.
in the history of man.
But here's kind of a bigger problem with the capital P, and I bring this up to people. The space program is very near and dear to my heart. Again, I absolutely 110% believe that we landed men on the moon in 1969. The evidence is irrefutable, and one of the reasons the evidence is irrefutable is because 630,000 people worked on that project. You're telling me that for a decade, no, for 2 decades, nobody got fired, nobody got laid off, nobody got caught taking too long of a smoke break and got screamed at by a boss, and it didn't make them snap,
Yeah,
and
and
that those persons wouldn't have rushed forward and said it's all a fake, it's all a fake,
well,
just to get some revenge.
but see, that's why on this one, I actually kind of think there is way more to it because little dribs and drabs have come out over the years, right?
And that's the crux is the infallible, utterly corrupt, totally controlling, and yet they can't hide it. So which is it? Are they all powerful and able to just crush us with their thumb without even considering it, or are they fallible? And if they are fallible, how have they kept it covered up for so long? Do you see what I'm saying? Not to disagree with you, to agree with you, to agree with you. I say that.
No,
Both of you guys.
No, so the warrant. So let's take this one other direction, and then I'll let Tim have a word here. So the Warren Commission also did not dig really hard, right? They if I'm put on that Warren Commission and I'm saying, okay, let me go in and dig out what happened with the president. Man, there's going to be world-class investigators digging into this shit for the next 5 years, right? Until we just get every answer everywhere known to man. And somehow the answer they had 35 minutes after the assassination, or however long it was when they arrested Oswald, it wasn't long. Oh, hey, problem solved, right? Quick work, Dallas police. Awesome. That that to me just doesn't hold water, right? There's a whole lot more to the story because they investigated forever. It just makes no sense. So Tim, I'll let you. I'll stop rambling here.
Yeah, that's the one thing that doesn't make sense to me either. I look at it and they quickly pegged Oswald to be the guy. And it was just interesting because to me, and this is just my opinion, I believe there was some sort of pre-planning there because you can't pick your guy up that quick and then, basically peg him out to be this madman who made some frequent trips to the Soviet Union and was married to a bride from the Soviet Union, and just all of a sudden, because he was having marital problems, and that he would go and try to shoot General Edwin Walker, and then he would go and just kill Kennedy. A lot of this stuff you have to have stuff that makes sense on this. And my opinion is that they believe that the American public. Dulles even said this himself. He says people don't read. I mean, the high volume that they had,
Yeah.
And the thing is that they believe how naive the public was back then, and they were, because you have to look at the mainstream media back then was what, three channels? You had CBS, ABC, and NBC, right?
It's sort of
And
tiny
yeah,
little
and they
newspapers
were
that matter.
yeah, and brilliant point, and the newspapers, and they were all correlated in one thing when it came to a narrative. And so you get that out to the public, they could feel safe and sound at that particular time. And you could say this guy had ties to Cuba and had ties to the Soviet Union, which was the biggest threat at that particular time, and it scared more people in the United States at that particular time. And there you go. This is the guy that you're looking for. Now, the problem that I have with that, again, like I got to keep coming back to, is the hour after the assassination. You have to answer from when he left the building to randomly killing the officer to getting arrested in that movie theater. How would they know that he shot the president? How did they know that this was the guy in the theater and all those policemen showed up to arrest him, and they had the cameras there as he was coming out of the theater? To me, it just doesn't add up. I mean, like, it really doesn't add up. And again, I want to mention this one more time, Tim and Bill. If you kill the president, you wouldn't stay in the same area that you're at. You wouldn't be in the same town that you're at. You would flee. I mean, that would make sense, unless this guy was just like, Jolly and West paid a visit to him and was like, okay, we're going to really lace this guy up and make him, completely confused. It just doesn't add up for me. And that's my take.
Yeah, and again, I think there are more questions than answers. I am not trying to sit here and be, Mr. No, guys, you're wrong. Here's all the answers. Now shut up. Trust me. Trust me. I think we're all on the same sheet of music. I feel like it gets obfuscated and hand waved away when people point to obviously nonsensical stuff. Like, it was either, Tim, you guys probably know, the gentleman with the umbrella.
The time traveler with the umbrella.
No, that was a guy.
Oh, the signaler, the guy that was supposed to be the signaler.
Yeah, he was razzing the president. That's literally why he was waving his umbrella at him. It was a reference to Chamberlain, because Kennedy's dad had been friends with Neville Chamberlain. That's all that was. And people. I think there's an unfortunate tendency to look at people who are asking questions to say, "Oh, no, this is what happened," and of course you guys are like, that's not what we're asking about. I'm not I'm not over here saying that there was a UDT team hiding on the top of the book depository with an antimatter rifle. I didn't say that at all. Why did you bring that up? And it's kind of dismission through absurdity. I think there are more questions than answers. And like Tim, I want to know why this shit's been sealed up for, and what is it, like Like it'll be sealed till 2060 or something like that. It's like, why?
It makes and they keep pushing the date further back, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. You know, I think the more adrenochrome and life extension programs that get given to certain senators, the longer they push this stuff back. You know?
all right. So I try to keep these things to about an hour, and I think we're at the end of that. But I'd love to have both you guys back. And next time, what I want to do on this particular topic is I'm going to do a little research beforehand, and I'm going to find all those documents from the Parkland Hospital that show all the little sketches of what they saw, and then we're going to compare that to the eventual autopsy that was done, and see those two things just don't come remotely close to each other.
I would love to, Tim. You let me know the date
I
and
would
time.
love to too.
All right, we'll get that one better scheduled. We put this one together kind of fast in it. So why don't we leave it at that? Because I know we're recording this on a Sunday evening, and I know people have family time. So, but I think we can agree that there is just a whole lot more to this story, and somebody knows something, or they're not telling us. And I'm not even sure I care who did what anymore. I just would love to know. So,
Right.
I really don't. I don't care if it was like my grandfather was responsible for. I don't care. Just somebody fill me in. So
well, Bill and Tim, it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate you guys having me on, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.
No
it was
problem.
a pleasure to meet you.
No problem. And I'll have this
Absolutely.
online, and I'll link it to you guys here sometime this evening.
Thank you.
All right. Have a
All right,
good one,
thank you.
guys.
Take care.